Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the William Bonney podcast. Today, I thought I would have a look at the probably dumbest and easiest ways you could find yourself getting sent to prison. Last episode, I looked at ways of escaping from prison. So today, I thought I would highlight some of the easiest ways that people have found themselves into prison, and easiest and / dumbest ways. Now, to be fair, I've found myself in prison plenty of times, and a handful of those times you would consider to be fairly dumb. So it would be wrong of me to point the finger at other people without first highlighting my own misfortune and my own stupid decision making. Some would say most of the times I ended up in prison were fairly daft, but there are a couple that stick out in my mind, and I'm willing to share with you today. Most of the people who have listened to my diary podcast, and if you haven't listened to my diary podcast, I would encourage you to do so, as it's a real deep dive into what my prison experience was like. It's difficult to try and work out which was the most stupid, but there's two that are on my mind straight away. The first of which being the first time I got sent back to prison. We're looking at 2002, December. I'd just come out from a 2-year sentence for robbery. Hanging around with scallies and bums, and I was in a bedsit with a bunch of these bums, and we were drinking. We ran out of drink. I gathered together all of their money so we could go and buy more alcohol, and went up to the pub. I went up to the supermarket with a pocket full of cash. Just as we was walking in through the front door of the supermarket, there was a big stack of beers. It was one of those sort of boxes of 20 or 15 cans, whatever it was. And we kind of just looked at each other and realized that we could just pick this box up and walk out the door with it, and nobody would be able to stop us. And so we did. We picked it up. We walked out. We quickly found myself getting arrested for that. And I found myself back in prison the next day because I was on license for an offence, and them seeing that I was not sticking to that license and being a scally still, I was back in prison within 2 weeks of being out of prison for stealing beer that I had a pocket full of money to buy. So that was pretty retarded of me. The second time I got sent back to prison was the same, for committing an offence, the same day that I got out of prison. So I used to rob drug dealers, and one time I came out of prison because a drug dealer that I robbed went to the police, gave a statement, gave evidence, didn't mention to them that he was a drug dealer. He just said that I'd kicked the door off his flat and robbed him of all his possessions and money, when that's not really fair assessment of what had happened. It was more like a Robin Hood style robbery, but that's not the way that they saw it, and that's not the way the judge saw it. So when I'd finished my time, I was just tunnel visioned. I went straight round to his house to go and kick his head in for breaking the kind of code and grassing, really. And when I got to his house, the door was locked. So I went round to the back, climbed up on a flat roof because there was a window open. And as soon as I got up to that window, I noticed that the flat was empty, or the house was empty. So there was no items in the house. So I just jumped back down off the flat roof again and walked off. I didn't think that I'd actually committed a crime. So I just went about my business, basically. Next morning, I get phone calls from my friends and family saying that the police have just booted all their doors off and they're looking for me. So, I handed myself in thinking that, not even thinking that I'd committed a crime, and it must have been for something old, something I'd done in the past. And my lawyer assured me that if it was old, that they should have dealt with it while I was in prison, not kind of, waiting for me to get out and, bring in new charges and things. So I went to the police station, handed myself in, and that's when they told me that it was for a new crime, the crime of attempted burglary, the day I got out of prison. So they knew exactly what I was there for. So I got busted again. Two of probably the dumbest ways you could end up back in prison. I can't really point the finger at anybody else while I have those in my belt. And like I say, if you haven't listened to my diary podcast, as soon as you finish this, have a look in the playlists. My diary podcast is there. There's a whole bunch of episodes of me basically describing my 10 years in and out of prison. Now, I've talked before about ways that people that I would call straight goers. Now, I was a career criminal, so I had no intention of living an honest life or a straight going life. Whenever I got caught for a crime, my intent was to try and make myself better at crime, so that I wouldn't get caught in future. I had no intention of living an honest life, or living by the book. But you find a lot of people. There is always a handful of people in prison that have been there, and they've never committed a crime in their life. They may have had maybe a couple of extra pints on the way home and driven or something, and got caught for drunk driving. They may have found themselves getting into a fight and accidentally killing somebody, or severely hurting them when, say, for example, one of the guys I knew, he was on one of the shortest life sentences I've ever seen. He was on a 4-year life sentence, a 4-year tariff, but with a life, obviously, sentence attached to it, because somebody had hit his missus, and then he hit them once. They fell back, hit their head against the curb, and died. So, he was banged up for murder, but he had no intention of doing it, and he'd never committed a crime before in his life, and he probably never would have committed a crime if somebody hadn't hit his girlfriend. So there are a handful of people in prison under these sort of very different circumstances. And I've mentioned before about there was a guy in Penzance who was late for a train, so he was driving along his Range Rover, went too fast, hit someone because it was dark, it was nighttime, and he was driving so fast that he hit them and they went over a hedge. The girl died. She was out walking her dog and she died. He kind of heard that he'd hit someone. He didn't even realize he'd hit someone, and went out to have a look. There was nothing there because obviously the body was over the hedge, and carried on his journey. It was only later on that he was caught, and he was sentenced to, I think it was either 2 or 3 years in prison. He was a business owner, never committed a crime before, suddenly finds himself in on the wing with a bunch of hooligans like myself. It happens. I remember one of my friends, I went to go and see him in his cell one time, and he had a new cellmate, and this guy looked like a fucking pissing dog. He was scared. You could see it in his eyes that he was scared. He was just sat in the cell, sort of on the top bunk, almost like cowering back at the back of his bed, because it's a very different situation that you're in. It's one thing being stuck in in an office maybe, or a workplace with a bunch of people that you don't want to be there with. You can always leave at the end of the day. But when you find yourself on a wing full of hooligans, and that at worst all they're going to do is lock you in, and they leave, you have to stay there. It's a very different scenario. Now, I got a message from one of my friends the other day. He sent me a link to a story, and we used to work together, and he sent me a link to a newspaper article about my old boss, a chap called Wesley Gorrell. I'm going to put his picture up on the screen now, and I'm going to put the link to the article in the description, because I think it's something that everybody needs to have a look at. And if you've got any sons or daughters or kids or friends or anything, of people who like to drive too fast, because this guy is an absolute moron, and I would put him up there in the class of scumbags, really, because he would sit there doing coke at work. He would just be always leering and over the girls in the office. He was just your scumbag who's managed to make it, really. He started to make a lot of money. His business was quite successful. He started to make a lot of money. He started hiring sports cars and, driving them up country, hiring out big Airbnb houses, like big houses with the pools and everything. When he went for business meetings, the managers would go up there, hire out the massive nice house, and they'd get a couple of hookers to come down, spend the night there, banging them, snorting coke and everything. They pretend to be, they pretended to be property developers, and they were developing properties in New York and things like that. And these girls were too dumb to see through it, so they'd be like, doing what girls and prostitutes do, snorting coke and everything. And yeah, and then he bought himself. This guy is renting his own house. He's got a family and everything. He's renting the house, and he bought himself a £50,000 BMW when I was there, just because it was big and fast. And he was constantly telling me about how he was speeding. And then he was telling me how he couldn't really afford it because he was going through tires, which were expensive, and he was also, eating petrol. So it wasn't too surprising when I saw this article about how he had crashed his Nissan GTR into another car. So here, I'll just read it from the article. The court was told that 45-year-old Goral had driven across Arch Hill roundabout in Truro in the direction of Falmouth and past the junction to the old Falmouth Road when he overtook two cars. Moments later, his black Nissan GTR was found sitting sideways across the road, having crashed into another car containing a mother and her two daughters, one of whom was only 8 at the time. The child, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, had to be airlifted to Bristol's Children's Hospital with a broken neck. Her head had detached from her spine. Guys, it's making me choke up just reading this. The court was told this would be normally fatal, and the skill of the people there who were there saved her life. She also suffered multiple fractured bones and a bleed on the brain and spent 3 months in hospital. The mother also received devastating injuries with multiple broken bones resulting in 3 operations, including part of her calf muscle to form a new kneecap. She is now classed as having a disability and said in a victim impact that she was in pain daily. The eldest daughter received whiplash injuries, and the emotional impact on her life is said to be severe. A collision investigator calculated that his average speed was 84 miles an hour, while collected from the car showed that the average speed in the 5 seconds before the crash was 95 miles an hour, and that he was travelling a minimum of 81 miles an hour in the 180 metres before the impact. Now this is not surprising when I know the guy. What's more surprising is that even after the incident, he got caught speeding again. So you'd think, like, say, for example, if I got caught out and I crashed into someone, even accidentally at a low speed, and it injured the people in the way that he's injured them, I don't know if I'd be able to pick up the keys and get in the car again. Yeah, Wes thought it was absolutely fine to not only pick up the keys and get in the car again, he went out and was caught speeding again afterwards. The sad thing is that anything to do with cars, like, if it's death by dangerous driving, if it's, causing injuries by this, he was only sentenced to 3 years. He's going to serve 18 months behind bars. With tag, you might get out after about 14, 13 months, something like that. He was disqualified from driving for a further 4.5 years. I don't know why he hasn't been disqualified for driving from life. It's completely reckless and changed this girl's life and everybody involved. The sad thing is that he's quite personable. I really hope he gets his head kicked in as soon as he gets into prison. But a lot of people inside will take a shine to him. He's got one of those personalities where he'll fit in, and he's got money, so he could probably do all right. I hope he gets extorted, and I hope he lives in misery on protection. But he's just one of those guys that will probably come out smelling of roses. It's very difficult to quantify what he's done to those people. But like I say, he's possibly not a completely innocent straight goer, but he's very quickly found himself banged up. The next one I'd like to talk about, a little bit more light-hearted. He was one of the chaps I met in prison when I was in Portland. He stole a watch from a Rolex shop. The classic, oh, can I just try it on? And then as soon as it gets put on your wrist, you run out the door. He ran out the door, round the corner. There's a bus stop there, and he stood and waited at the bus stop for someone to come and pick him up. Well, a bus to come and pick him up. He was waiting for a getaway bus. And obviously, with all the CCTV and everything in London, he quickly found himself getting picked up by a police car, not a bus at all. But what a dumb way to get caught. you're out there, catching a £20,000 watch, and you couldn't even just run round the block and maybe try and run all your way home. He's waiting for his getaway bus. That's a pretty dumb way of getting caught. Now, something that's come up in the news in the last couple of months, I wouldn't normally make videos sort of about this sort of thing, but it really is quite challenging and quite difficult to kind of understand why these women would do this. So I've got the next two stories are going to be about two women. One of them is a mum of 8. She was jailed for making an entirely false rape claim against someone that she barely knew. And it was all because she wanted to get the attention of her ex-partner. So her partner left her, and she then blamed this completely innocent person, someone that she worked with, said that he forced his way into her home and raped her in her own home, and went to the police and, told her story and everything. The victim said he was at work at the time, and when the police started to question this girl, she obviously, her story didn't really hold up, and the gentleman was able to produce CCTV from his work, which showed him at work on his own the whole time. So it was a complete fabrication. And he is very, very lucky that he was at work and not just sat at home on his own, because he obviously was able to refute these claims. And the woman was obviously stupid enough that she didn't plan it out well enough, if you know what I mean. They could have been working together. She could have said it was at work and possibly got away with it. But yeah, she's been jailed. How long did she get jailed for? Let's have a look. Again, she's only been jailed for 3 years. Now, he would have got something like 5 or 6 years, at least, maybe, for rape. I think there's an argument there that she should have been jailed for the time that he was going to be jailed for, because again, 18 months she'll do, maybe less than that with tag. So, yeah, it hardly seems fair, doesn't it? Now, the next girl I want to talk about is one that's happened in the news very, very recently. Was a lady called Eleanor Williams, age 22. She's been jailed for 8.5 years at Preston Crown Court for 9 counts of perverting the course of justice, as she claimed she'd been the victim of an Asian grooming gang, which was a very, very, during the 2000s, I think it was around 2010, wasn't it? Something like that. There was a massive thing about the Rotherham, how the police had failed to investigate, and there was an actual grooming gang, and these girls were actually being abused. But again, she's a woman who faked her rape injuries with a hammer and caused 3 men to attempt suicide after a grooming gang claim, has been jailed. It's just ridiculous. She hit herself in the face with a hammer, causing herself considerable injuries. And these guys, they're just, I don't know. Again, I don't know anything about their lives, but we'll assume that they're just normal dudes with, straight going guys. What would you do if your partner, the police came and took him from the house or from the work and accused them of rape? And then you see images in the news or on Facebook. There was a Facebook story got shared over 100,000 times, with obviously her injuries being shown, very real injuries, and your partner's being accused of rape and doing that. I know my wife would leave me straight away. There's no way that she's ever going to believe me just going, "Oh yeah, no, love, I didn't do it." It's just, it's sickening. It's undeniable. And then suddenly you find out that it's all complete rubbish. It's going to ruin their lives at home. If they try and move to another area, they're going to get seen and chased out of there. There's some very serious guys out there who go out and hunt these people. I know people who have been thrown off a bridge before because they've been accused of sex offences. It's a very, very dangerous game to play. And, I think it's just because of the serious injuries that she faked, and also the amount of people that she's accused. There's 9 counts of perverting the course of justice here. So it's just all fabrication. It's just absolutely insane. And this is the problem when, you see with the whole Me Too movement, there was a big push and another sort of hashtag saying believe all women. And 99.9% of the time you can do. And then there's always these outliers, these just crazy people that just make it all up and ruin people's lives. And not only that, but they put the seeds of doubt into people's minds who, these things have happened to them. But that people always remember back to that time when actually, no, Eleanor hit herself in the face with a hammer. So yeah, she finds herself in prison now, and I doubt she'll be having a very good time of it. I know even in female prisons, you do this kind of thing, and you're gonna get a rough time in prison. She'll be in 4 years' time, so she's going to be looking at being like 27, late 20s by the time she gets out, probably maturing then. We can only just put this down, hopefully, to being, a stupid young girl, maybe mentally ill, maybe, who knows. But it's a pretty dumb way to find yourself in prison. So that was a bit of a heavy one today. It's all I have at the moment. I've been working lots, so I do apologise. I know I promised you more podcasts and I've given you less. So I will try and put one out tomorrow as well. I have a little bit of spare time where I'm working at the moment, so I do have a bit of time to kill. I don't want to just put out rubbish. I do want to make it kind of, good listening and things. Those of you listening and know about me writing a book, I do have more time to write my book. So when I'm not doing podcasts, I am writing my book. And I will have some crime fiction out for you very shortly. All right. So thank you very much for spending the time with me again today. Thank you very much for listening. Like, subscribe, do all the things that YouTube likes, and we'll see you again very shortly.